from conflict prevention to respect of human rights and to the fight against the killer disease. However, we must recognize the enormous changes that are taking place in Africa. Most countries across the continent have been able to maintain a sustained level of growth for a whole decade, around 5% per year. Even despite the difficult external conditions, for 2012 and 2013, forecasts remain favorable, in spite of the persisting Eurozone's financial stresses, which of course impact African countries as well. Moreover, significant progress towards some of the Millennium Goals has been recorded in many African states. Child survival is increasing, maternal health is improving, more and more young people get into school, the number of those living in poverty is declining, while a new middle class is gradually emerging. Yet, development remains too slow and unequal. Performance among countries tends to be diverging. Wealth is too often concentrated in the hands of a few, and corruption is still a major issue, despite some important efforts are being undertaken to fight it. If foreign direct investment has increased in the last decade, this also means that it is foreign investors that increasingly own assets and resources. The rapidly growing and ever more educated youth population will need jobs and will demand more opportunities. African countries cannot be left alone facing these challenges. In fact, they will need the support and the commitment of the international community and of the European Union in particular. A second topic that we would like to tackle pertains to the big changes that have been taking place in the Mediterranean since the outbreak of the so-called Arab Spring. These remarkable developments demand, first of all, the acknowledgement that the policies concerning the democratic transition, which have been adopted so far, have not produced the expected results. I believe, indeed, that the current situation requires from Europe discontinuity with the past, the breaking off with the attitude that European countries have usually had vis-à-vis their Arab neighbors. We shall discuss here how Europe must cope with these major changes, how it can effectively support the transition to democracy, and most of all, how it shall relate itself with the emergence of political Islam in those northern African countries which have experienced revolts and have already held legitimate and recognized democratic elections. This is also in the light of the election, likely, I think, of Mohamed Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood's candidate to the presidency of Egypt, and of the events that took place in that country just before the polls were opened, namely last Friday's decision to dissolve the recently democratically elected and Islamist-led parliament. This event casts an ominous shadow on future development in Egypt. But it must be clear, this is my opinion, that Europe cannot and shall not support a military regime in Cairo. We have already done this mistake. Democracy is democracy. Even if we don't like the winner, we have to engage with them. Egypt and Tunisia, on their part, are now called upon to answer outstanding questions which will affect the years to come. First of all, how to build a democracy, their peculiar form of democracy. This leads to a series of related issues. What the relationship between Sharia and constitution can be in an Islamic country, how Muslim law and civil law can be reconciled, and especially what role and rights should be given to women and to ethnic and religious minorities. How can be pluralism implemented in a modern Arab state? How will the MENA region modernize itself? I believe that keeping in mind the differences between the various Islamist parties, we shall encourage those which embrace a more secular vision and commit themselves to the respect of civil and religious freedom, not unlike the role that the Justice and Development Party has been playing in Turkey in the last decade. We cannot exclude at this very moment that moderate and fundamentalist parties will eventually clash. In Tunisia, for example, Rashid al-Ghannouchi is resisting Salafist pressures who aim at establishing an Islamic state. Europe's role in this context will be crucial. As far as Libya is concerned, we must acknowledge that the transition is slower and beset by obstacles. More than 6 months after the death of Muammar Gaddafi, the country is still a battlefield. It's largely controlled by a network of armed militia, and the elections for the Constituent Assembly, which should have been held 2 days ago, have been postponed due to frequent clashes in the southern east of the country. However, what is happening in the northern African states today is very groundbreaking. We do not know yet what the outcome of these developments will be, but we do know that they will have an impact on Europe at least in 2 ways: in Europe's relations with its neighbors and in the building of an European Islam. For the EU, the Arab awakening represents a challenge not only as far as values and culture are concerned. It will be necessary to redefine our economic relations with these countries, stressing the need for mutual cooperation and the respect of their right to own and manage their natural and economic resources, helping them at the same time reduce their dependency on oil and train new educated generations who can contribute to the technological and economic development of their countries. In brief, Europe needs to rethink its whole political approach to the Arab world in order to avoid repeating the fatal mistake of the past. In this context, we cannot, of course, neglect the Middle Eastern question. A few weeks ago, the Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak said that inaction is not a possibility. He acknowledged that time is running out and called for an interim agreement in the conflict with the Palestinians to be implemented, even unilaterally. I must say that I welcome Mr. Barak's concern and recognition, which, however, have been prompted by the changes which are taking place in Israel's society and in particular by the demographic transformation in favor of the Arab population. Recently, I have been on a FEPS mission to Israel, Palestine, and Egypt together with my friend Ramon Obiols. On that occasion, we had the chance to meet and discuss the issue of the stalemate of the peace process with many leading Israeli personalities, including Mr. Barak. We noticed with disconcertment that a substantial part of Israel's political leadership didn't fully acknowledge the real extent of the problem. To some of them, the Palestinian question was not even a question. Rather, it was considered a sort of European obsession. Moreover, they failed to recognize the tremendous opportunity offered by the Arab awakening, which instead they looked suspiciously at, and the changes that it is bringing about in the Arab world. Of course, we understand it is sometimes easier to deal with the devil you know rather than learn to trust new neighbors and leaders. But it is crucial not to sit on the fence and wait until the storm passes and engage diplomatically with all democratically elected political forces. This holds true for Europe as much as for Israel. I'm convinced that the European Union has the duty to contribute to a renewed initiative for peace in the Middle East. The United States currently seems to be unable to play effectively the role of the broker between Israelis and Palestinians, and cannot leave the whole responsibility to the two opposing parts. Indeed, let me tell you that such an approach hides inaction. Israelis and Palestinians are not equal and symmetric forces. This is a fact. As such, they cannot and will not play on the same level. Shlomo Ben-Ami, Thomas Schnelling, Jerome Segal, and Javier Solana recently promoted on the pages of the International Herald Tribune the idea of an approach focusing on the Israeli and Palestinian people themselves. The aim of such proposal should be that of investigating if there is any possible peace agreement that would be acceptable to the majority of both peoples. People, not governments. If the result of such investigation is positive, then a treaty should be drafted and forwarded to the UN Security Council for further action. Such a treaty should not be imposed on the parts, but it should represent a starting point for further negotiations. I think it's a good idea. At least I believe that the idea of an internationalization of the crisis is a good idea. This is also a consequence of the Arab revolts, a shift of attention from governments to people, based on the awareness that the so-called Arab Street will matter much more in the future foreign policies of the Arab states. If the Israeli and Palestinian people show acceptance to a possible compromise, then the Israeli government and Palestinian Authority might be encouraged to develop a more positive attitude. I think this is a good and fair proposal. My opinion is that the European Union should embrace and relaunch, because the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the peace process need to be internationalized. It is not just a humanitarian question. It is not just a problem of solidarity and economic support to the suffering Palestinians. The Middle East conflict is a danger, not only for the stability of the region. It concerns our own security, and for this reason, we cannot evade our responsibilities. But there is more than that. A persisting conflict between Israelis and Palestinians might have an impact on the changes that are taking place in the rest of the Arab world. Indeed, it could have the effect of radicalizing the transition process in those countries that only recently managed to get rid of hideous authoritarian regimes and translate it in